December 1952. London, the world's biggest city, was completely, utterly paralyzed. But it wasn't an invading army. It wasn't a natural disaster in any traditional sense. It was a silent, creeping yellow cloud. An environmental catastrophe so unbelievably severe, it fundamentally changed how we view the very air we breathe. Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to unpack a historical disaster that transformed a bustling metropolis into a literal choking nightmare. Okay, let's dive right into this. To truly understand the sheer terror of December 5th, 1952, you have to put yourself in the sensory reality of that day. Visibility vanished completely. In some areas, you couldn't even see your own feet. Drivers just abandoned their cars right in the middle of the road. Those famous red double-decker buses, they stopped running entirely. Unless, and this is wild, they were being led by conductors walking ahead on foot, desperately waving flares. But the absolute worst part? The air didn't just smell bad. It tasted like metal, like ash. It literally burned the back of your throat with every single shallow breath you took. There's a chilling quote that sums this up perfectly. London did not fall to bombs alone in December 1952. It fell to its own breath. And honestly, that is the great tragic irony of our story. Post-war London was rebuilding. The exact fuel that was keeping people warm through a bitter winter, the very industry powering their economic recovery, it was quietly turning against them. They were breathing their own ambition until, well, they could no longer breathe at all.
Section 1. Post-war coal dependency. The blood in Britain's veins.
So to understand exactly how this happened, we really have to look at a nation recovering from World War II. From 1945 to 1951, Britain was defined by severe austerity. And at the heart of their survival? Coal. Now, here's the catch. Britain actually produced excellent, hard, clean-burning coal. But because the national treasury was completely empty, they had to export all that top-tier coal to pay off their immense war debts. This left the people of London to burn the cheaper, softer, bituminous coal, a variety that is incredibly high in sulfur. Every single day, London consumed over 10,000 tons of this highly toxic fuel. It went into the massive power stations along the Thames, the factories of the East End, and virtually every single domestic fireplace in the city. There was no alternative. Warmth was survival. Which brings us to a staggering number: 2,000. That's the amount, in tons, of pure smoke particles that the capital was pumping into the air every single day by 1950. Just try to picture that volume. It's massive. At the time, sure, medical officers filed their reports, but nobody in power really saw this as a crisis. To the government and the public, the smell of coal smoke, the soot on the windowsills, that was simply the sound of a nation getting back to work. Section 2. The perfect toxic storm, anatomy of a killer. Now, what's really interesting here is how an everyday nuisance suddenly morphed into a mass casualty event. The answer? Meteorology. On December 4th, a massive anticyclone settled right over southern England. The wind just died, completely stopped. This created what meteorologists call a temperature inversion. So the smoke rising from a million London chimneys hit a layer of warm air high above, and it just stopped, bounced right back. The cold air and all the pollution trapped inside it was sealed at ground level like a giant jar with the lid screwed on tight. And inside that sealed jar, a lethal chemical reaction was brewing. Recent research out of Texas A&M University has finally cracked the exact chemistry of this mystery. First, the sulfur dioxide from that cheap coal mixed with London's natural weather fog. Then, nitrogen dioxide, which is another coal byproduct, acted as a catalyst. It rapidly converted that sulfur dioxide straight into sulfuric acid. Finally, as the natural water particles in the fog evaporated away, it left behind highly concentrated, microscopic drops of pure acid. The ordinary everyday pea superfog had chemically transformed into a 30-mile-wide poisonous stew. Section 3. 5 Days of Darkness, December 5th through the 9th, 1952. This brings us into the core of the catastrophe. 5 days where daylight essentially ceased to exist, and an entire metropolis suffocated. If we pace through the timeline, the progression is absolutely chilling. The temperature inversion begins on the 4th. By the 5th, the city is completely paralyzed. Sunday the 7th, that was the absolute worst day. The pollution was inescapable. By December 8th, particulate matter levels hit over 4,400 micrograms per cubic meter, and sulfur dioxide hit 4,000. To put that into perspective for you, that is roughly 100 times higher than modern World Health Organization guidelines. 100 times.
The smog was so incredibly pervasive, it was literally seeping under doors and filling up people's living rooms. The chaos out on the streets was almost unimaginable. People were wearing whatever makeshift masks they could get their hands on. Movie theaters actually had to shut down mid-performance because the smog had penetrated the auditorium so thickly, the audience couldn't even see the screen. And get this, over at Wimbledon Common, a cross-country running race only kept going because the track marshals stood out in the invisible gloom, blindly shouting directions at the runners as they stumbled past.
Section 4. The human cost. A city suffocates. So the crucial point here is that this wasn't just some historical inconvenience. This was a mass casualty event, unfolding in slow motion right inside people's homes. The data from those days paints a chilling picture. The undeniable correlation is right there in the numbers. As the black smoke and sulfur dioxide spiked off the charts, the death rate followed immediately. As the air grew more and more acidic, people were essentially drowning on dry land. Hospitals completely overflowed. Nurses were working tirelessly, pressing wet cloths over their own faces just to breathe, while tending to patients whose lungs were completely, catastrophically failing.
For decades, the official death toll was listed at 4,000, but modern epidemiological research has revised that number to something truly shocking: 12,000. 12,000 people died as a direct result of this 5-day event. About 4,000 perished immediately, choking to death in their beds or out on the streets, and another 8,000 died in the agonizing weeks and months that followed, their lungs and hearts damaged beyond repair by that corrosive air.
What's truly shocking, though, is the massive disconnect between the official political narrative and the grim reality on the ground. Initially, the government, and yes, this includes Prime Minister Winston Churchill, downplayed the entire disaster. They insisted it was merely a natural weather event. They deliberately avoided using the word smog. Why? Because acknowledging the industrial component meant admitting that their fragile, coal-based economic strategy was actively killing their citizens. Meanwhile, the medical reality was straight out of an apocalypse. Mortuaries ran entirely out of space, and undertakers were actually forced to store coffins in hallways. Section 5. The legacy of clean air, rising from the ashes. But a disaster of this absolute magnitude couldn't just be swept under the rug forever. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the tragedy sparked a public reckoning that would ultimately change global environmental history. Public outrage finally forced the passage of a truly revolutionary piece of legislation, the Clean Air Act of 1956. This passed a full 7 years before the U.S. equivalent, and it fundamentally changed urban life. It authorized local councils to create strict smoke control areas. It legally banned the emission of black smoke, and crucially, it provided government grants to help ordinary citizens convert their home fireplaces to burn smokeless fuels. What followed wasn't just a legal shift, it was an infrastructural revolution. The nation began a rapid, aggressive transition away from solid coal, moving toward oil and, eventually, the discovery of North Sea gas. Those iconic, filthy pea soupers that had literally defined London ever since the Victorian era, they were essentially banished forever. And the data from the decades that followed absolutely proves that it worked. There was a dramatic plunge in atmospheric particulate levels from the 1960s onward. We're talking about a 100-fold decrease in pollutants. Public health drastically improved, urban flora and fauna finally began to return, and the beautiful historic architecture of London was no longer buried under a thick inch of greasy, acidic soot. Section 6. Invisible Threats. Modern Air Pollution. Now, it's an incredible success story of public policy, for sure. However, the fight for clean air didn't just magically end in 1956, it evolved. Today, if you look out over the River Thames, the air looks remarkably clear. Initiatives like the congestion charge and ultra-low emission zones have done absolute wonders for the skyline. But we really can't be complacent, because that thick, choking coal smoke of the 1950s, it's unfortunately just been replaced by something far more insidious: invisible pollution. Our modern challenges are incredibly complex. The primary culprit is no longer the coal grate in the living room, it's vehicle exhaust. Specifically, diesel engines pumping out nitrogen oxides and microscopic PM2.5 particles. We're also dealing with transboundary pollution drifting right over from the continent. And surprisingly, there's been a huge recent resurgence in domestic solid fuel burning. People are installing wood-burning stoves just for that cozy, homely feel. And believe it or not, that is now the largest single source of PM2.5 emissions in the whole UK. All told, this invisible modern pollution still contributes to around 13,000 early deaths every single year in the UK alone.
But to give you a real sense of how far we've actually come since 1952, researchers recently crunched the numbers to see what would happen if modern London went back to using the exact same fuel mix they used back then. The result? Even with all of today's modern technology, burning that much coal would result in 1,633 additional deaths every single year, just from particulate matter alone. The Clean Air Act is literally still saving lives today.
So what does this all mean for us? The Great Smog of 1952 taught the world a terrifying lesson, that progress without caution is really just another word for organized poison. We successfully cleared the thick black smoke from our skies, but what invisible threats are we still breathing right now? As developing megacities around the globe face their own severe smog crises today, London's history stands as both a grave warning and a powerful testament to the fact that we can choose to change the air we breathe. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.